Well, I think we have to first of all recognise that all cultures, all human cultures, practice some form of ritual behaviour or perform varying rituals to certain degrees. So the point here is that we mark special events as human beings throughout our lifetimes, throughout the calendrical year, by often doing public performances or private performances through set forms of behaviour. And so, in some sense, the field of ritual studies is trying to examine exactly what exactly are rituals, why do people do rituals, and in some sense, what are the functions of rituals, what are they doing? So, in some sense, what we could say is rituals are forms of patterned symbolic behavior in which people use learned set phrases and words and maybe, liturgies and certain forms of action that convey meaning. So I think the definition of ritual is problematic, but we can look at the way in which human beings are engaging in what we call culturally constructed, so learned forms of behavior. The first thing, of course, rituals are not natural. They may mimic natural behavior, they may parallel natural behavior, but there's a big difference between, say, eating a sandwich for lunch at Subway and going to Mass on Sunday and taking the blood and body of Christ. There are very different ways in which we perform rituals religiously and secular. So we shouldn't think that ritual also is just something that's religious. We have secular rituals. We have, say, Thanksgiving as a secular family ritual. We have graduations. We have certain ceremonies. We have political rituals. The inauguration of a president is a political ritual. So I don't know if I'd offer a definition of ritual in some sense, but what I would say is perhaps there have been people who are trying to examine ritual behaviours. So I think in some sense, another way we can think about ritual, what a definition of ritual is even to critique the very category. So one famous scholar of ritual theory, Catherine Bell, really wants us to see that in some sense, from a critical analytical perspective, rituals don't exist. The word ritual is an abstract concept, and we of course have to police intellectually the tendency to reify concepts, right? So to think of ritual as a thing out there in the world, when really all there really is are varying degrees of what Catherine Bell calls ritualized practices, micro actions happening on a daily basis, minute to minute, right? So we could look at, say, Catholic Mass, that we call a ritual, but we know that Catholic Mass is made up before it begins by people coming to the church, by wearing their best clothes, by greeting outside, by coming through the doors, and perhaps the priest coming up onto the altar. And so each one of these moments through the Mass is patterned forms of micro actions that then conclude it, and then the congregation might move out of the church. And that's what we call the ritual as a self-existent thing. And we call it, say, Mass, or the church calls it, say, Mass. But the point is it's lots of smaller actions. And so in some sense, there's no such thing as ritual. There are varying degrees of ritualization, of marking certain practices as special or distinct or different to other ways of acting. So, as I said before, eating a sandwich for lunch at a Subway is very different from perhaps sitting down with my family and eating a turkey and having cranberry sauce and pulling on crackers, right? So that's one sense as it's very expected, it's marked off, we have a lot of excess food at Thanksgiving, we come together as a family, we mark kind of abundance and our familial ties, and that's very different from just eating something for lunch or in my office getting out a 2-minute noodle. And so what Catherine Bell is asking us to think about is the way in which we distinguish our daily actions from other ways of acting and mark those off as better or worse. And so we wear different clothes to mark certain occasions, and often the more prestigious the occasion is, or the more important the occasion is thought, we buy clothes that are more expensive. And so we mark off, instead of, say, wearing jeans, we might wear a suit. Instead of wearing shorts and a t-shirt, we might wear a shirt and a tie. And so I might do that in a professional setting to somehow mark that I'm a professional individual, away from, say, what I might do on Saturday at the park with my children. And what Catherine Bell then asks us to think about is that the ways in which we mark off our behaviour, the ways in which we ritualise our behaviour as distinct, as better than other ways of acting, is a way in which we gain, in some sense, power, the way in which we can redeem our positions and redeem the way other people think of us, and redeem the way in which we present ourselves to other people. So in some sense, there's a constant process of negotiating, even strategically, how people think of us, how people interpret us, and how we define ourselves in relation to other people. And so what's nice about thinking about ritual not as a fixed thing in the world, and somehow having to come up with a theory of what ritual is, and then having no theory of what it's not, what Catherine Bell is allowing us to do, and more recent theorists, is come up with a unifying theory that allows us to think in one conceptual way about getting out of the bed in the morning and washing our faces and brushing our teeth, putting on a suit and tie and coming to work, going out for dinner in more casual clothing, and then on maybe Sunday going to church and acting in a certain way. It allows us to think of the degrees and associations between shaking hands and saying Baruch Atah Adonai at a Jewish temple. And so we don't need to think of these as two separate arenas, but we can think of them as interrelated ways of marking off forms of behaviour as better or worse in different contexts. And this allows us to, in some sense, strategically, deliberately mark ourselves as better, as more prestigious, as more worthy within those contexts.